Hello and most welcome to 1036.
Hej.
Varsågod.
Vad gör ni? Ja.
Well, most welcome to 1036. And I will today have an eloge to the following people whom I will forever be indebted to. And now, of course, they do not appear. Well, 1992 at Cambridge University, maybe the world's most renowned institution for knowledge and thinking, next to Oxford. I would say in this area it beats Oxford, but it's an equal draw. Mostly people not from the philosophy faculty proposed that the French philosopher Jacques Derrida be awarded an honorary doctorate. For the first time almost ever in modern time, there was a stark opposition. Among others, the university's professor of philosophy, Hugh Mellor, 18 other philosophers from US, Austria, Australia, French, Poland, Italy, Germany, Holland, Switzerland, Spain, and Britain, including Barry Smith, Willard Van Orman Quine, David Armstrong, Ruth Barton Marcus, and René Thorne. They sent a letter to Cambridge claiming that Derrida's work does not mean accepted standards of clarity and rigor, and describing Derrida's philosophy as being composed of tricks and gimmicks similar to those of the Dadaists. The letter concluded that where coherent assertions are being made at all, these are either false or trivial. Academic status based on what seem to us to be little more than semi-intelligible attacks upon the values of reason, truth, and scholarship is not, we submit, sufficient grounds for awarding an honorary degree in a distinguished university. In the end, the protesters were outnumbered, 336 votes to 204, when Cambridge put the motion to a formal ballot. Though almost all of those who proposed Derrida and who voted in favor were not from the philosophy faculty. Hugh Mellor continued to find the award undeserved, explaining, he is a mediocre, unoriginal philosopher. He is not even interestingly bad. Derrida later suggested in an interview that part of the reason for the attacks on his work was that it questioned and modified the rules of the dominant discourse. It tries to politicize and democratize education and the university scene. To answer a question about the exceptional violence, the compulsive ferocity, and the exaggeration of attacks, he would say that these critics organized and practiced, in his case, a sort of obsessive personality cult that philosophers should know how to question and about to moderate. I think those 256 professors of Cambridge should be put to shame, but I'm also incredibly thankful to them. And the reason for that is that I think reading about this once more, I heard about it early on, 95, 96. This is the fourth time I really think about it. That was the drop that broke the glass, so to speak, made everything overflow for me. I would say it's an act of shame, but they reveal themselves by attacking the foremost philosopher, thinker, and one of the most prolific read philosophers of all modern time, Jacques Derrida himself. They uncovered their complete ignorance and they show their true face. What is the substance of their thinking? Because substantial thinking talks for itself. It does not need to follow rules of correctness, assertiveness, regulation, and so forth. It's absurd. It's like telling a boxer, you can't box freely. You need to first use your right, then your left, then your right. And then you need to take a break, make a twist, and then you start over again. Those are the rules for boxing. It is absolutely ludicrous to have rules for philosophy. Actually, it's way beyond belief. And just the fact that when I first heard it, the professor who told me thought it was correct as well. Gothenburg University is one of those who actually followed completely the lead of these much disgraced professors who objected to the mere honorary doctorship, which is not even a proper doctorship. And apparently that was enough to threaten their rule-based thinking. And also Gothenburg University did not allow anyone to make anything of Derrida if it wasn't a criticism, because what he wrote was way beyond their understanding, and therefore it was deemed mediocre, not rule following. I would say it's a disgrace without measure. This might be one of those most disgraceful things ever happened. Could be comparable to the ignoring of quantum mechanics, or similar to making something very offensive, like putting Jewish scientists in jail and concentration camp just because of race. That was done in the rule of the Nazi Party in Germany. I think it's on the same level. It's pure ignorance. It's naive, childish, and dangerous. And it clearly showed, because 224, that's a lot, clearly showed that at least 224 were not in the capacity of thinking. They had abandoned their thinking capacity. Otherwise, they would be more than happy to participate in discussions without rules, without condemnation. This showed the status of intellectual level in the Western Hemisphere 1994. It's a low bottom marker. You can't really descend lower than that. I think that is the absolute limit. You will need a shuffle to get any further down under earth. And under earth is where these cretins deserve to be. And I was shocked to hear that even Norman Quine was part of the fellowship who objected to the nomination of Jacques Derrida as an honorary doctorate. But for me it was also helpful. I think that is incredibly revealing. And taken in other circumstances would be similar to in sports, telling that someone can't win the prize because of his heritage, race or something similar. It's an absolute disgrace. In the rooms and hallways of thinking was disallowed. Couldn't get any worse. It's the same as saying in a hospital treatment of patients is disallowed. Everything else is okay. Wearing the coats, having a stethoscope, talking to each other, but all treatment of patients is henceforth disallowed in the hospital. I would say that is equal to what happened in 1994. And many people don't realize the grotesquity of this. It's beyond word. And I think this is a good introduction. I think I catched your interest here. And I think it's time to talk about mindfulness. This lecture was asked about already like 500 episodes ago, when we were still in Örebro, the neighborhood of Örebro. I call this lecture Quantum Mechanics, Heidegger and Mindfulness. And this is an introduction how we can better understand the works of the deconstructionists and how we can let them help each other to become clear, how the understanding, or rather the stops for understanding, because of course there were actual stops of understanding at Cambridge. There were rules, and as long as those rules are, so to speak, in practice, that will make it absolutely impossible to understand Heidegger, Derrida, Jacques Lacan, Merleau-Ponty, Foucault and others. It would be absolutely impossible. And I will show to you the reason for that, taking evidence from physics and also from neurology. And I myself came to an understanding by reading a paper by the Finnish professor Paavo Pylkkänen at the University of Helsinki, called the Quantum Epoche. And it made me understand that a completely different mindset is necessary, an absolute predisposition to understand quantum mechanics / Heidegger / Derrida and all those others. And understanding will not come. And I would also argue no understanding of whatever can come before that boundary has been lifted by diligent work. So there's two parts of this proposal. Is that first one is we can discover how thinking actually works, and also that there is a work to be done. Thinking doesn't come by itself, although so many people today assumes that thinking is by itself. And I think these professors that disregarded the appointment of Derrida as an honorary doctorate, they thought thinking was absolutely passive, not something you did. And I also will try to show why we can't understand quantum mechanics until we trained our brains to work in a more comprehensive, intellectualized way, where analysis and abstract thinking is allowed. And I think that is the gospel of Jacques Derrida, that we need to allow abstract thinking once more, and a thinking that doesn't follow rules. A rule-following thinking cannot be abstract by definition. It is something made up by a community, an authority, or a communion of people who says, this is thinking, follow those rules. After that, there can be no abstraction. It is just rule following. And although it's incredibly easy, it's also very unrewarding. And this is, of course, the reason why monosemism was developed in the Western culture. It's a rule for thinking, so you don't have to think. And that thinking can actually be shown on an MRI, especially an active MRI. It can be indicated also in the electroencephalogram. And it's a simplified form of activity in the cerebellum. And that does not allow for things of higher thinking. It blocks out higher thinking. If you want to have an association here, think about the N2 neurons. Those don't allow deeper thinking. They have no inherent understanding possible for them. They are fast twitch. They just make sort of a crude, sketchy, impression-like passive thinking. They're just reacting. They don't add anything to what already is. And since we know the absolute majority of people today are having N2 neurons, the stressor neurons, they are very fast to make decisions about what something is. And I would say that stops all possibility of having an intellectualizing capacity these days. And that we need to train the cerebellum to make it healthy and even go further. So contradictions can be allowed. Contradictions are an absolute necessity for abstract thinking. Without that, there is no thinking at all. It's all automated. We can detect how exclusiveness in perception looks from the cerebellum, and also the working of the rest of the brain, which the cerebellum directs. And it's lesser brain waves that cannot make for understanding. It cannot make for thinking. And that is incredibly well proven now by Ian McGilchrist in his latest 2 books, The Matter with Things. And he's referring to well above 3,000 individual research, for that matter, to show that thinking has changed in a way that is rule-based, automaticated, not abstract anymore. Abstraction is actually incredibly rare. I think in one of those research projects he found it in only 2 per mil of the population at a university. It is incredibly rare. And of course it's disliked as well. It's horribly disliked, and that was the reactions from these 224 professors to Jacques Derrida. They, despite abstract intellectual thinking, it should be rule-based. Orman Quine explained this as an intellect power should always be able to follow certain rules. It should not be new, and it should be acclaimed by others, like it was a sort of law, a law-based boxing. Think about that. It's an oxymoron, or maybe Orman Quine was just a moron and not an oxymoron. It's hard to tell that, actually. And another feature that really shocked me the first time I heard this, I already know about the connection between Arkady Plotnitsky and Jacques Derrida. Jacques Derrida is was the only philosopher together with Paul Feyerabend that actually supported science. All the others took the position of Albert Einstein, that the world should be sort of rule-based, human rules somehow. So they also said no to science, and that makes their objection, these 224 disgraceful people who participated in the ballot with a negative vote, they voted against science as well. And that adds insult to injury, I would say. It doesn't get more severe. It could be the most gruesome thing that ever happened during the 20th century. Ignorance way beyond excuse. The simplified brainwave that is present now in these misused bodies and unbalanced body stature doesn't have the complexity enough to do thinking anymore. So what it does instead is repetitive movement, repetitive strain, and repetitive rule-based, so to speak, thinking. But it doesn't have any feature of true thinking. It is not thinking at all. And to make it even worse, it's not even shared. It is highly emotional, connected to that individual. And although they seem to speak with each other, they have no measure to know whether they understand each other, because awareness, reflection is not possible with those present brainwaves. There can't be a super level where you can sort of understand that you get understood. You cannot observe your own thinking. These 224 might more, of course they cannot observe their own thinking. So they would not even know if they understood by others. They're sort of shut out in their own world, way beyond a deeper understanding. It is more about correctness, conformity, costume, tradition to some level, well, new tradition or newly made tradition. And in the end, it's the leadership that decides how the current thinking wave should be, so to speak, be executed, or how it should look, which words to presently use. When I was at university, there were 50 words that were sort of pin words to use if you were to write a paper. Already at that time I had a friend, he constructed a program that made automatically papers at B level by using 50 of those expressions. Some of those expressions are gone today, but it was centering on them and adding substance to paper. We actually tried that. I tried to think about the subject and adding some substance without those words like context and discourse were very popular at the time. And that actually made it sink down on the level. It didn't get as approved as before. That's very interesting. So the more mechanical the writing is, the more repetitive in the surface level, because these people have no other measure to sort of judge whether something is good or not. They can't go into the depth, they can't go into the thinking. They can only judge on the surface in a mechanical way, like a computer. Therefore, adding substance to, for instance, a paper destroyed it to a certain extent. Just added things that are unnecessary, your own thinking or something that we need to understand, that this sort of thinking, this dysfunctional cerebellum, makes for a thinking that is absolutely random too. It's never the same. Actual thinking has a sort of a permanence to it. It lingers over time. But this is made up in the moment, and it's always different, because it needs to be a certain complexity level to transport permanence over time and also over space. And that measure is not, it's not up to that measure to be able to do that. That's an objective measure, and it need to be above a certain complexity level. That's it. If it's beneath that, it will not have permanence to any degree, and it would be constantly new. So the modern academia thinking is something that constantly changes, second by second, minute by minute. So in the end, it's just words and a sort of a system of words that connect to each other. And the great enemy is, as Ian McGilchrist more or less proves in his book, knowledge. This is the arch enemy of modern academia. Everything that is connected to the world and learning about the world, everything connected to intellectual work, abstraction, theorizing, all those are abhorred today. This is the great monster. Instead, we want to have sameness, lack of understanding, and repetition, not iteration. And I would say understanding this is the first step in reaching some truer values. And the pointer for me in the article from Paavo Pylkkänen was that there are two levels to reality, or what we have around us. It is appearance, and we have reality. To get to appearance, we need to project actively. That's the active phase. Actively project your hearing, or you actively project your forward thinking to sort of meet what is other. After you've done that, there is a sort of waiting, and you need to let reality seep into existence. So first you meet it, and then you let it be what it is. You don't tell it what to be. That second step is not followed today. It needs a higher complexity, and it needs sort of intellectual power, and that power is the only thing that can make you wait. Otherwise, you will preemptively try to capture reality. And this is actually the light of Plato, the light that shines everywhere and doesn't allow for shadow. The shadow is letting the appearance be just appearance for a while, not capturing it preemptively. And that makes the understanding very clear with the N2 neurons. Those are the ones that cannot wait ever. They directly need to capture and tell what it is. And in the end, you have only one level, reality. And as appearance is the same as thinking, thinking cannot be anymore. And thinking is passivity in the modern take. And it's not thinking at all. It doesn't look like thinking on the MRI. It doesn't work like thinking. It doesn't make any leeway for knowledge, prediction, understanding, development, depth, any of those things. It abhors knowledge. It lives from avoiding knowledge and convincing others to leave the alley of knowledge. It is aggressive, as you saw in this example. Jacques Derrida was even threatened to his life. And something that often Ian McGilchrist and also Paavo Pylkkänen shows to that the aggressive standard of the modern man comes from this impatience. The capturing is a sort of violence made on the world. The reality is just out there for us to just accept. It doesn't work that way. Reality has two levels, and once your cerebellum is not complicated enough, you cannot understand the two-level system. So the first take on this is to show why we need two-level thinking. And the reason is to understand both quantum mechanics, Jacques Derrida and Heidegger. Those cannot be understood, and they are absolutely clear about that, cannot be understood in the old format. You can't use rule-based thinking to understand Jacques Derrida. Rodolphe Gasquet clearly shows that in his book. That made me understand it needs a change of your whole system. You need to change actively your cerebellum so you will be able to perform yourself the act of deconstruction. And the act of deconstruction is nothing else than the ability to do abstract thinking, the ability to intellectualize, to reflect upon your own thinking, to drive your own thinking forward, and sort of establishing understanding. And this is something I mentioned in the previous lecture, that correctness is what's the teller of today. If something is correct, it is good, so to speak, according to these professors like Orman Quine et al. Correctness. There is no longer a reality, neither appearance. There is no physics. There is no materiality to the world. It's just a made-up thing. And everything that enters into academia should be abhorred. You can only make yourself true, and in a very authoritarian way follow the demands of the institution, the professor, or the group. Everything needs to be followed, and that are the laws of correctness. It's an incredible simplification. It's really jumping on our intellectual Western heritage. It's going further than any one of the Greek philosophers in the wrong direction. No longer is this only horror vacui, this is horror sapiens, the horrors of knowledge, the horrors of understanding. And the more you get into that, the harder it is to get out. So you need an incitement, and that's the first leg of this journey. I try to show why we need to do this. I'm giving you motivation, because not only do you gain all of this, abstraction, intellectualization, clarity, you will also be heard outside a little group of conformists. You will be able to speak to everyone, because this is not dependent on a conformist set of rules for correctness. It is actual truth. It's truth in the world, and that will work everywhere. Another aspect is you can still play the game. If you want to play the game and go by correctness, you can do it in whatever way you do. But your level of creativity would be much higher. You can write whatever you can do within. So you will enhance your possibility even within the system. And I believe that's the best thing, to leave the system as it is and sort of improve it from within. It shouldn't be crushed, because that will only take away the little things these people have. Criticism is legit in this, because I'm trying to sort of incite you to walk the path towards learning how to deconstruct yourself, because that is actually the foundation for understanding Heidegger and Derrida and also quantum mechanics. The second thing is, you will gain absolutely everything. By allowing contradictions, for instance, you no longer have to follow made up rules for what is true, for what is ett ögonblick. So truth and correctness is not what the world is about. It's much more to it. And by getting into a more complicated wave in the cerebellum, you will be able to construct whatever you want by will. It's an opening into an incredible source of thinking, creativity, and abstraction. And it will be much more advanced than the rule-following correctness, because you yourself will have liberated yourself from the idea that your thinking is following rules. And I would say those rules are abstractions, because you don't even make those rules up yourself. They are random, happenstantial, made by chance stops in your thinking. And since they are completely random, because they're coming from the outside, it's more like kicks or negative inputs, but they are not defined what they are, just negative, taking everything down. I would say that is das Man, conformity, and it lessens everything, bar anything. And in this lessening of everything, you have this diminished thinking, lessening of thinking, a thinking that doesn't reach in to the details, the deepening, or the juiciness of reality. Because further down, we all have incredible resources. I've seen the different research material in people whose cerebellum is working to a level that is just beyond belief. It was this man, I don't remember his name, I would try to find a link, but even as he was put into that incredibly narrow and claustrophobic MRI, could I explain it? You have to lie down on a little bed, so to speak, bedlet, and then you're pushed into this gigantic machine, and you are inside this enormous magnetic field, and you hear this very, very loud clicking sound of the machinery. It's absolutely horrendous. These people remain completely calm in this situation. They showed up no stress symptoms, no coarse thinking, not this anti-intellectual thinking. They remained absolutely calm and reactive. Reactive means that you can still react. Your patterns of reaction are not conditioned or not inadequate for the stimuli. They are perfectly suited for what they are to do, and that is very, very different from what is usually the case. And this area can actually be trained. That person had trained himself during years, and here is the moment of mindfulness. I would say true mindfulness is a possibility. I would say in the literature, it's not a possibility, because this either or the exclusiveness will disrupt thinking wherever you come, and you cannot relax, because exclusion is the N2 neurons in effect. That's when they are at work, doing their best to disrupt the brain rhythm, and they should not be active otherwise than in specific circumstances where there is great danger. But in the absolute majority of people today, the N2 neurons are infect, and that means no deeper understanding is possible. So that's one of the reasons we need that training. The second is, once you understand exclusiveness, it's something coming from a greater intellectuality. It's a byproduct, but making the byproduct the center, which is centrism in modern philosophy, where you try to center and say this is the good thing, this is what we put the light on, you make everything very little, and you make the whole system mechanical in character. And this is of course the repetitive mechanical structure of the left hemisphere in the vision of Emil Gilchrist. It can also be seen as a almost dysfunctional cerebellum, which doesn't coordinate the brain in the proper way. So the brain cannot let appearance be, and it cannot project. So we try to capture everything, and then we miss out on reality, and this is of course not having a connection to the real world. And this is one of the reasons Lakoff points out the body is cut out from academia and university world. Why is that? Well, that's the seat of abstraction. All the more highly elevated abstracted thinking are in the body. Modern academia don't like abstraction. It doesn't like higher thinking. It should be mechanical, repeatable. It should be taking away a piece of poetry, cutting it to pieces, something you can do mechanically, repetitive, and it can be imitated. And these people think that's the only way you can teach something, like making the people who come to the classes sort of more mechanical, more predictable, more obedient. There is a hint of authoritarianism here as well. But they don't become the same, though, I would say. They become emotionalized and subjective. But with mindfulness, and this is true mindfulness, this is when you understand that division of the world, this is where the whole stress starts. And it's the same thing to a certain extent as being stressful, is having this exclusiveness, the law of the excluded middle. The centrism is a sort of stress. All these 224 professors were suffering from stress. They would not fare well from an investigation into an MRI. They would not be calm. They would not have brainwaves we know are intellectualizing brainwaves, abstraction brainwaves. They would have nothing of those traits. They would have repetition only. You cannot expect anything from people who even puts down science. Attacking science. It's a little bit like attacking humanity, and this is what they did. You see, as an aggressive standpoint in attacking humanity as such, and trying to help out a mechanical view of the world. And once you understand that, and this goes so well hand in hand with the appearance reality, this is of course aletheia and theia. The way of understanding takes both. Just light burns away everything. Then there is no knowledge, but neither is knowledge. They both go at the same time. Truth is absolutely dependent on falsity. Knowing is absolutely dependent on not knowing. With only knowing, there could be neither not knowing nor knowing. And this puts the body into stress, enormous stress. And the stress levels that can be shown in the MRIs today are just beyond belief. They are horrendous. That torture will disappear from your system, and your body can for the first time sort of getting more balanced. And this is of course the heart consciousness, the seat of the soul, I would say, to the higher level of human thinking. And it's also the seat of morality, of ethics. All those things are gone from academia. I remember Tanchus saying something, my former teacher in philosophy of morality, saying that morality is just a calculation. How horrendous, absolutely horrendous. Simplification, just ignorance. And the scary thing, he's in charge of ethic councils and everything. It just takes away knowledge. I think ethics is what makes us human, and he says, take it away. Just have authoritarianism and conformity. That would be enough. There's no wonder we get stressed today, because that prospect is worse than everything. It can't get any horrendous. He made me shiver the whole through my organism, and he was applauded by the students. It sounded so modern. And it's this making the brainwaves more healthy takes also training during the day. We have become very numb in our doings. We become coarse with our bodies, we break our bodies. I have a friend who developed a really bad back problem just from one day to another, just by not having a complicated cerebellum, because you are a sick organism if your cerebellum is not working fine. The physical effects here cannot be separated from mental effects. It affects the physicality of your system. It makes your body run out of fuel, literally. The N2 neurons creates the T2 muscles, and then they will break your body. And this is happening to a greater extent. Burnout syndrome is bigger within an academia than any other area of working, any other area of society. There's a good reason for that, because this thinking itself is what makes our system go bad. It's a teaching of sickness. It's like a virus spreading to other viruses, convincing them not to be smart. There is nothing to be found in smartness, being able to do whatever one wants to. I listened to one of the lectures Derrida mentioned. He said, I'm so happy. You have no idea what a pleasure is to be alive. And I think he was absolutely honest. And I think his honesty also showed in his want to help, for instance, a person like John Searle. He actually spoke to him, and that was the voice of a friend. Searle chose not to listen, but it was a helping hand. It was not criticism. Whereas Searle was absolutely venomous in attacking Derrida, using all methods like bad naming him, putting him down, saying that he's ignorant and so forth. No want whatsoever in helping, just criticizing and putting down. What sort of intellectual life is that? It's nothing. That is unethical, it's really bad, it's horrendous in so many different ways. We get softer in our acting, and we can help the cerebellum by the hand. The cerebellum and the hand is very deeply connected. Once you train your hand, we're doing things that takes precision. Precision is the key figure here. You won't do driving a car. It must be complicated things. then your whole system gets more balanced and your thinking becomes more acute. That's going away from the illusion of representationalism. And I think that's a very important aspect. They go hand in hand. Whereas you train mindfulness, do meditation, we for instance do yoga very slowly, that will help the cerebellum little by little every day to become more and more adjusted, more balanced, more complex. The calmness is complexity, and truth in the eyes or the ears of Heidegger speaks itself. It doesn't need a helper. It doesn't need crutches. It doesn't need to lean on something like this. These are the crutches of Ormond Quine or John Searle. A crutched thinking is a stopping thinking, because those crutches you need to take with you, and then you're going to have those crutches within your own thinking system. And leaving the heart means that you can't feel anything spiritual. That complexity solely is not possible when your cerebellum is working on repetitive strain. Instead, you will have pain in your body and pain in your soul. Both those things can be helped and healed by meditation, by repeating the phrases as people used to do in the abbesses, in the monasteries, in the convents, all over the place, on the mountain of Montserrat or the mountain of Athos in Greece. They repeat, they sing, they do the hymns. They do it in praise, but also to get spiritual, to become intellectual, more understanding, to realize there is a greater and bigger complexity to the world, and that complexity is the same as beauty. Very nice word from Benoit Mandelbrot, that fractality is beauty. It shows the beauty, and that's a beauty that's been dropped from us. From these people, those 224 of Cambridge and many others, by their violence, by their aggressiveness, by their argumentative negative power, takes away both from others and from the self's understanding. That is not listening. It's teaching other people to shut their ears and not listening to nature, because these were the very same people that said nay to physics. It was a firm, concisive no to everything related to reality, and thereby they made reality and truth the culprits, the scapegoats of everything bad. They are a little bit like Don Quixotes attacking windmills, but whereas Don Quixote never made any real damage to any of the windmills, these people are doing damage, and they usually are using governmental funds or stipends to cause harm to others and themselves. But at the core is this lack, the lack for beauty, the lack for preciseness, many times pointed out by Ian McGilchrist, this incredible clumsiness, the lack of skill, not being distinct, not writing in a way that is clearly showing where the problems are, but just being in between, neither in the big sector nor in the small, pointing with all the fingers spread out, having another example, having a handwriting that is unreadable. Those texts are unreadable. What John Searle writes is not understandable, not even to himself. Neither of the modern universities. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make brain waves of understanding. It's way too simple. It's way too repetitive. Way too copied. It's not original. It's not true. It's not there. It hasn't sprung from reality, and it denies reality. It's schizophrenia in action. Whereas Bishop mentioned that for mathematics, and that is probably the best example, how people get so absurd so they started to invent the numerals that exist by themselves without any constructor. Can you imagine what obstacles to thinking is to create beings that doesn't even have a substance to them? How can you sort of reveal them? How can you get to the true being, the world soul, the spiritual part of the world, when you construct things that never been constructed and are just being obstacles to understanding, making the whole world crowded with objects, taking their space, and sort of making us thirsty in want of knowledge. Whereas it clearly shows there is another path, and that is of mindfulness. True mindfulness, when you train yourself, you can reach everything, because all that you see around you is coming from this originary source. Nothing comes beyond the cerebellum and the brain working together with the body. And it's capable. This is the most complicated thing in the whole of universe. And it has capabilities that is beyond belief. It could do anything that you want it to do, and yet more. So why buy into this cheap mechanical view that doesn't give you anything? Why not open up to a more comprehensive, bigger picture where everything is possible, where everything is allowed? And as an incredible, unlimited source of creativity, when everything can be thought up, and you don't have to diminish your thinking just to polarities or negate thinking. How little isn't that? If my thinking should be like John Searle, and what he did, he wrote a whole paper where he was just negating Derrida, taking his proposition and putting like a notch next to it. How simple is not that? I think that goes to show that when the cerebellum is not working, the intellectual power, which is situated in the prefrontal cortex, are taken over by the limbic system. We react emotionally, and this is what these people did. The 224 of Cambridge have replaced their intellectual power with emotionality, an emotionality they could not control and they were themselves victim of, because there is no free will. If the cerebellum doesn't work, you will be slave of your own happenstantial, completely random emotion, and you can react to whatever. It doesn't even have to have substance. And of course, an attack on Derrida and science, of course, didn't have any substance. It's just an emotional gut reaction. You become like a worm. Looking for water is all what you're capable, and going away from the light, from understanding, going away from knowledge, a sort of a very uncomplicated organism, like the organism swimming with their backs to the water in a puddle of water a hazy winter's morning. Those organisms is what you can become, but you can stir away from that. You can become the most complicated creature ever to be, because fractality doesn't have a limit. Once you open up the divisions and the limits and the pre-arranged things, and you stop telling reality what it should be according to a set of correctness, it will open up like a tremendous flower, and it will have all the nectar in the world. This is the true Eden. This is the happiness of Jacques Derrida. And that's an openness that would allow anyone who's capable enough to become honorary doctor. Doesn't have to put limits and say, no, out of here, go out, we don't like you, and so forth. No, this opens up an era of understanding, of brotherly love, and how we can stir away from fighting and discussions, because the rules inevitably, if we just follow them, it is going to be just conflicts for the rest of human era. And I think that can absolutely be avoided with quantum mechanics showing the way, telling people this is the true voice of reality, and then they might start listening, and then you can put into the message that you can improve, you can become a better person, you don't have to have pains and so forth. Because we were created perfected. It's this limitations on knowledge that is the problem, and that we learn to live with those limitations and we accept them as there are no other possibilities. It's living in poverty next to a rich field of fruits and berries and vegetables, and just by sheer ignorance you starve yourself to death because you don't know those things are around the corner, or they even could be eaten. Something that happened so many times in history, people simply don't understand. And these people in Cambridge that didn't understand that they were offered knowledge. Instead, like an immune system, they rejected the food for thoughts, they rejected development, they rejected knowledge of only sheer gut reaction, emotionality, subjectivity. As subjectivity that's not even shared among them. They don't even understand themselves because there is no awareness. We know that. Cannot be an awareness with a rule system for correctedness. You just simply react. It's like pushing a ball to a wall. It will push back, but that doesn't mean that the ball has a will or an intention. It's your pushing that makes it. And it was the pushing of Derrida in the conflict with John Searle that made him push back. But it doesn't tell that John Searle has awareness or intellectual power. Just the opposite. The negation, the argumentation, it shows there is no thinking going on at all. But it also shows that thinking is permanently available. And you just need to open the door and let both sunshine and shadow be, because reality is constructed of both. Here you see Thea and Alathea. Without Thea there will not be Alathea, and the opposite. It's all about cooperation. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon.